always coming to Portland's rather like a homecoming for me in many respects. Before I started off wandering the world and working in places like Ethiopia, Central America, Philippines, Indonesia, on a quest to end world poverty through our classic development model. I lived in Longview, Washington, grew up in Longview, just north of here. I assume most of you are familiar with where it is. And when I was a kid, we'd frequently come down to Portland to visit the big city. And now further north in Seattle, where I now live, we think of Portland as the real leader in creating the model of the livable, sustainable, community-centered city of the future. And it's always fun to come here and see the joy and vibrancy in your wonderful public transit system and so forth. And I know you're aware that you still have a long way to go in Portland, but you should be proud of what you are accomplishing here. Now, during our time together this evening, I'm going to share with you my deeper view of the work facing those of us who are aware that as a species, as the human species, we are in deep trouble. We are presented with a worthy challenge. In brief, we must liberate our species from the cultural trance of empire, transform our institutions from a model of domination to a model of partnership, and unleash a new era of human possibility. Does that sound like fun? Hey! And it's responses like this that give me hope for the human future. Much of my contribution to this work comes from connecting ideas with which most people are familiar, particularly folks like yourselves. Knit them together to meld them into a big picture that is rarely revealed in the course of most of our public conversations. Now, for the past several years, the argument I've been making that our economic system is driving us to global economic, social, and environmental collapse has elicited the following question. When is the collapse going to hit? Often people would say, isn't it going to have to get worse before it gets better, to wake people up? Well, of course, as we all know, the collapse is now underway and a lot of people are waking up. We have very little time before the environmental and social collapse, which is the real issue, becomes irreversible. Recognizing that we have a problem is an important start, but we need to provide people with the tools to differentiate between false solutions that in fact reinforce the status quo of the dominator system and real solutions that replace the dominator system with a cooperative, community-based system of partnership relationships and partnership institutions. Now, what we've known is that we were moving into a threefold collapse: financial collapse, social collapse, and environmental collapse. And fortunately, the financial collapse has come first. And I say fortunate because financial collapse has captured people's attention, but it's only about money. And therefore it can be fixed. At the same time, it exposes the corruption of the Wall Street financial system, which bears the major responsibility not only for the financial collapse, but also for the social and environmental crises that are unfolding around us. So here's a quick picture. Wall Street excesses that brought down the U.S. and global economies provide a powerful demonstration of the failure of a false economic ideology. You're all familiar with it. According to this ideology, there is no public interest, only private interests. According to this ideology, markets work best when freed from rules and accountability, when all assets are for sale to the highest bidder, and when every person pursues their own unrestrained personal greed. You've heard that. Yeah. We each pursue our own individual personal greed, and that does best for a whole society. Right. Well, we tested that ideology in a bold and reckless social experiment over a period of some 30 plus years, and the results are now in. Amazing. It turns out that markets do need rules, resources must be shared, and Jesus was right. We do have to care about one another, and we have to act with mindful consideration of a larger common good. Wow! And we need an economic system that acknowledges these basic facts. You know, it's so stunning how simple it is in a way, how basic. Now, the failed ideology of greed and individualism framed the creation of a financial system so perverse that those responsible for bringing down the global economy in the pursuit of unearned profits have walked away with fortunes in the billions of dollars, while innocent millions have lost their jobs and their homes. At the same time, inequality is tearing apart the social fabric not only of U.S. society, but of societies around the world. Climate change is bringing massive weather disruption that, along with the depletion of our soils and groundwater, threatens the world food system and a massive displacement of human populations. The United States is engaged in futile military occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we depend on an aging physical infrastructure and economic infrastructure designed to run on cheap oil that's fast disappearing. All too often, discussion of the environmental crisis suggests that we can solve the problem on the cheap with new technologies such as converting to solar and wind energy with no consequential changes in how we live. But of course, it isn't just about energy. It is about the loss of soils, freshwater, fisheries, species diversity, and much more. It's about a few million people consuming the bulk of the planet's resources and 2 billion plus people marginalized and deprived of the basics of an adequate life. Dealing with these issues requires a massive reallocation of resources, those resources available to us as a species, and it requires deep changes in how we live, which in turn requires a radical restructuring of the institutions that shape our collective resource allocation decisions. So how do we humans decide how we will allocate our resources among their many possible uses and among the needs of so many billions of people? Well, in an earlier time, we made such decisions locally based on the needs of the individual clan or tribe. Our human relationships were mediated by bonds of mutual caring. Money was unknown in the earlier days. In our current society, by contrast, most every aspect of life depends on money and our access to money. This gives enormous power to those who control the creation and allocation of money. Again, so simple, but a fundamental fact we are not supposed to notice. To use a computer analogy, the Wall Street financial system, which is the system in our society that creates and allocates the money, has become the operating system of the economy in this society, which makes the defining values and priorities of Wall Street the defining values and priorities of the larger society. And Wall Street has only one value. You guess what it is? Money. Money. And it has only one goal: to maximize financial returns to those who control the money system. We used to think of it as Wall Street worked for the interests of shareholders. Well, those were the good days. Now it works exclusively for the benefit of its own managers, for the CEOs and the top money managers. And out of all of this, social or environmental consequences find no place on Wall Street balance sheets. This is the system that controls our society. The financial meltdown is our wake-up call. And it's time to move beyond tinkering at the margins and reboot our economies with a new operating system based on new values and assumptions and a sweeping institutional redesign. And the leadership for this great change will not come from within the U.S. political system, as you may have noticed, because the political system is captive to Wall Street interests. Surprise. The leadership must come from we the people in a declaration of our independence from Wall Street. I want you to notice something here about timing. This is our opportunity. I'm very clear that if I had written this book and been speaking a year ago about shutting down Wall Street, I'd have been laughed out of town. Now I tend to get standing ovations. So let's put our situation into a deeper historical and evolutionary context. For the past 5,000 years, we humans have been living in a cultural trance of our own making that alienates us from the land, our true nature, and our place in the cosmos. So who are we humans? From where did we come, and for what purpose? Here's how I understand the new story based on the data of science and the wisdom of indigenous peoples and the teachings of Jesus and other mystics. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the great integral spirit that expresses itself through what we know as creation embarked on a bold and risky experiment in reflective consciousness by bringing forth a species able to step back and to reflect on creation in awe and wonder, and to participate as a conscious co-creator in the continued creative unfolding. And we humans, of course, are that species. Our reflective consciousness gives us the capacity to choose our future with conscious collective intent. It was a very risky experiment on the part of the Great Spirit, because the capacity for self-awareness gives us an ego that can run out of control if it forgets it exists only as part of a larger whole. Now, as our human consciousness was awakening, and our human capacities for self-direction grew, we learned to communicate through speech, master fire, domesticate plants and animals, and construct houses of skins, wood, stone, and dried mud. We developed arts of pottery, painting, weaving, and carving. We undertook vast continental and intercontinental migrations to populate the planet and adapted to vastly different physical topographies and climates. We created complex languages and social codes that allowed for life in larger communities. In our earliest days, we raised our children collectively in the clan, the tribe, the village, initiating them in the ways of life and the need to care for our Mother Earth as she in turn cared for us. Then some 5,000 years ago, something went terribly wrong. As we turned from the ways of earth community to the ways of empire, it was a time of separation and forgetting. Community, partnership, and the celebration of life gave way to domination and violence. The few expropriated the wealth of the many. The masculine drove out the feminine. We came to worship only the sky father and turned against our earth mother. We came to value the power to kill and destroy more highly than the ability to create and nurture life. Conquest became the measure of human greatness. Economies came to be based on servitude. With a few on the top and the many on the bottom, everyone was placed in competition with everyone else for the favored positions at the top, and bonds of caring and sharing were broken. Money and power became the prime arbiters of relationships. During this time, the creative energy of the species was redirected from securing the well-being of the tribe to advancing the technological instruments of war and the social instruments of domination. Resources were expropriated by the winners to maintain the system of domination. The positions of power too often went to the most ruthless and psychologically damaged members of society. Now, if this discussion of empire sounds familiar, it is for good reason. Although kings and emperors have been replaced by corporate CEOs and hedge fund managers, we are still living in the era of empire. Now, in the past 100 years, we humans have achieved a technological mastery beyond the imagination of previous generations. Yet lacking the wisdom of place and community that is the heritage of indigenous peoples, the cultures we now call mainstream have lost their way, forgetting what it means to be human and denying our connection to the web of planetary life. The result is an ecological and social crisis that threatens the very survival of our species. The time has come to rediscover our humanity and bring ourselves back into balance with our living Earth Mother. I think of this as our final examination to determine whether we humans are a species worthy of survival. We must not, need not fail in this examination. At its core, the financial crisis is actually a spiritual crisis. It is a crisis of fundamental values. Our fate turns on the answer to a basic question. What purpose do we expect the economy to serve? The answer is ultimately spiritual, and it is framed by this well-known scriptural verse from the Sermon on the Mount. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. You've all heard that before. Its real meaning is brought to the fore by our current situation. Mammon, of course, refers to wealth as an object of worship. The worship of a false god, a form of demonic possession, an evil force in opposition to the God of life. From this perspective, not to put too fine a point on it, Wall Street is an evil institutional force because money is its only value and the pursuit of money is its only purpose. So it raises an interesting question. Why have we given over control of our government, our lives, our collective future to institutions devoted to the service of mammon? It is in part because the stories of our prevailing culture give false answers to so many defining questions. Here are three of the most basic. What is real wealth? What is real wealth? What do we mean by God? And what is our human nature? Three basic questions. Let's start with wealth. As defined by our public culture, wealth and money are largely synonymous, and those who make money are creating wealth. And therein lies the heart of much of our problem. Money is the most mysterious of human inventions. It is a mere number of no intrinsic value or utility that has no existence outside the human mind. Yet we have allowed it to displace life as our object of sacred veneration and to become the ultimate arbiter of human priorities. Where does money come from? It's created from nothing with a simple accounting entry when a bank issues a loan. As economist John Kenneth Galbraith once famously observed, the process by which money is created is so simple it repels the mind. So simple it repels the mind. When you take out a loan from a bank, the bank opens an account in your name and enters the amount of the loan in its ledger. That becomes a liability on the bank's account, offset by the corresponding asset of your promise to repay with interest. Two simple accounting entries and money magically appears from nowhere. This simple fact is the key to the ability of the institutions of Wall Street and its global counterparts to rule the world. It also makes banking a very profitable business. Now money, particularly money created from nothing, without any direct contribution to the creation of anything of corresponding real value, is phantom wealth. It has no substance or intrinsic utility. Now, in alliance with the Federal Reserve, Wall Street and its global counterparts control the creation and allocation of phantom wealth money. Their allocation decisions determine the fate of nations and shape the boom and bust cycles of economic life. Those individuals whom these institutions favor with large allocations of these magic numbers we call money can live in grand opulence in the midst of scarcity. Those from whom they choose to withhold these numbers face death by starvation in the midst of plenty. That is the power of these magic numbers. That is the power of Wall Street that we have yielded to these institutions. Okay, so what is real wealth? What's real wealth? We might say it as anything that has real intrinsic value: land, labor, knowledge, food, education. Most valuable of all are those forms of wealth that are beyond price: love, a healthy, happy child, a job that provides a sense of self-worth and contribution, membership in a strong, caring community, a healthy, vibrant natural environment, peace. These are all the most priceless forms of real wealth. They show up nowhere on our financial accounts. Now, given our culture and the way we have structured our institutions, we might assume that most people don't really know the difference between money and real wealth. Does anybody here have any problem with that distinction? In a national poll, it turns out that 93% of adults agree with this statement: we are too focused on working and making money and not focused enough on family and community. That's 93%. Now, generally, this insight remains our unspoken personal truth because it is not what we hear in public discussion. So collectively, we act to increase phantom wealth even at the cost of destroying what we know to be the real wealth of Earth's abundance. This is about being prisoners to a story, captive to a story. The most amazing thing is that almost all of us know the truth in our hearts, and we can readily articulate it when called to do so. So what do we refer to when we speak of God? What does that term mean? What does that term evoke in your mind? Think about it. Some years ago, I was privileged to share a conference platform with Jesus scholar Marcus Borg. And I've never forgotten his defining statement: tell me your image of God, and I will tell you your politics. Tell me your image of God, and I will tell you your politics. Borg explained that the many scriptural metaphors for God largely fall into two basic clusters. One is God, the male patriarch with a flowing beard, the God we visualize in human form living in a distant place we call heaven, the God of Michelangelo's famous painting in the Sistine Chapel. The other image of God is the Spirit image, the Spirit manifest in all being. Now, it's interesting. The patriarch image sets up a hierarchy of righteousness and domination running from those closest to God to those most distant, and leads to a competitive individualistic politics of separation, domination, favor-seeking, and wealth accumulation. This is the God of our most common public discourse and of much of our religious liturgy. It is the foundation of the Calvinist belief that the rich and powerful are by definition God's most favored, and that financial success and earthly power are marks of special righteousness. Within this belief system, the world is whatever God, the patriarch, wishes it to be, and it is beyond our means to change it for better or for worse. Think about how that image serves empire, serves a system of domination. By contrast, the Spirit image, by which we recognize the face of God in every human being, animal, insect, grain of sand, leads in turn to a politics of community, of shared purpose and mutual service. Within this imagery, everything in creation is both manifestation and agent of a great spiritual intelligence seeking to know itself through the creative exploration of its possibilities. Within this belief system, to do harm to another being is to harm oneself. Within this frame, we see ourselves as co-creators in a grand quest in search of ever more wondrous possibility and find our ultimate fulfillment in lives of service to creation's continued unfolding. By this reckoning, we are here neither to destroy life nor to escape from it, but to engage in and contribute to the creative unfolding of the whole. This is our creative purpose. Now, contrary to the public culture and the content of our religious liturgy, polling data here again suggests that, in fact, The private beliefs of most Americans align much more closely with the spirit image than with the patriarch image. This was the one that I found most extraordinary when I saw these results. 84% of Americans view God as being everywhere in everything rather than someone somewhere. 84%. God as being everywhere and everything rather than someone somewhere. Given a list of characteristics and asked to pick the one that best describes God, 71% chose loving. Only 5% chose remote, and only 2% chose judging or controlling. So what of our human nature? We become so accustomed to cultures and institutions that reward and celebrate our human pathologies of individualism, greed, hubris, deceit, ruthless competition, and material excess, that many of us have come to doubt even the possibility that we humans might have as a species the capacity to cooperate in the interests of a common good. Yet most people daily demonstrate our human capacity for caring, sharing, honesty, cooperation, compassion, peacemaking, service, and material sufficiency. Think about it in terms of your own lives. Most of the people we know, most of the people we associate, these are the qualities that they express day by day. It's pretty much universal that all but the most psychologically damaged among us experience blissful pleasure when extending an uncompensated helping hand to another being in need. Or we experience great satisfaction in functioning as a cooperative member of an effective team. Again, we need only think about our own experience. But beyond that, we have the data from scientists who use advanced imaging technology to study brain function. Their studies confirm that our brains are wired for cooperation and for life and community. Turns out that individualistic violence, greed, destruction, and disregard of others are all pathologies, dysfunctions. It is our true nature to love, cooperate, and create. And this is all consistent with polling results that find most all humans want much the same thing in life. We want healthy, happy children, strong, caring families and communities, a healthy, vibrant environment. And most of us want the same thing for everyone. Isn't that extraordinary? And so contrary to what we are continuously told by our culture. It turns out we have a wonderful convergence. The world we must now create, if there is to be a human future, is the world for which our brains are wired and the world for which most humans have longed for millennia. To get it, we must take the next step in the struggle for democracy by declaring our national independence from Wall Street, much as the patriots of an earlier era declared their independence from the King of England and his crown corporations. And as it was with the original American Revolution, leadership must come from the citizenry. As you may recall, the Minutemen, the Patriots, organized before the Founding Fathers came together and decided that it was their due to lead the revolution. Now, President Obama has so far responded to the Wall Street meltdown in ways indistinguishable from George W. But he's poured trillions of dollars into zombie banks in the hope of restoring the financial system to its normal pre-2007 function. Even though this hasn't worked, won't work, and begs the question of why would we want to restore Wall Street to its former condition? As a legalized crime syndicate engaged in counterfeiting, usury, fraud, and extortion. Wall Street institutions are in the business of creating money out of nothing for purely private gain, engaging in predatory lending at exorbitant interest rates, falsifying security ratings and financial reports, and using the control of money to hold the public purse hostage to their outrageous demands. President Obama's acquiescence is testimony to Wall Street's enormous power. Wall Street controls the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the Congress, the federal courts, much of the media, many of the world's largest corporations, and unfortunately the White House, irrespective of the party or person in power. Wall Street has used its power to suppress wages, dismantle social safety nets, thwart efforts to protect and heal the environment, and capture the total benefit of productivity gains for financial speculators while shifting the tax burden to working people and reducing much of the society to debt slavery. To have the world we want, we must secure our future. We must strip Wall Street institutions of their political power, shut down the corrupt Wall Street phantom wealth machine, and put in place a new financial system designed to serve the needs of the real wealth economy of Main Street. And I'll say more in a few minutes about how we do this, but before we do that, I want to share another story. I bet you've heard this one more than once. Economic growth, as measured by gross domestic product, GDP, creates the wealth necessary to provide material abundance for all, increase human happiness, end poverty, and heal the environment. The faster we consume, the faster the economy grows, and the wealthier we become as the rising tide lifts all boats. Inequality is essential to the social order and prosperity because growth depends on wealthy investors who, I would note, are the most productive and beneficial members of society, and we must therefore free them from the taxes and regulations that limit their ability to accumulate the great fortunes needed to bear the risk of investing to create the new jobs that enrich us all. If a few get rich, instead of condemning that out of envy, which I would remind you is a mortal sin, celebrate their good fortune, because as they get richer, we all get richer. Wealth trickles down. Anyone can succeed who applies themselves. Failure is a sign of a flawed character. I gather you've heard this story before. Have you ever suspected that there might just be something not quite right about it? Of course, to start with, GDP actually measures the rate at which the economy is extracting useful resources from nature, running them through the economic system, and disposing of them as toxic waste into our air, water, and soils. It is actually a measure of the cost rather than the benefit of economic activity. It's so amazing. We get so conditioned to the prevailing idea that we don't see these things that are so obvious until pointed out. I myself did not really get this idea that GDP is a measure of the economic cost of our well-being until an ecological economist colleague of mine pointed it out in a forum about a year ago. All the time I've been working on it. So don't feel bad if you didn't pick this up, but now you've got it, right? It's the cost, not the benefit. We can and we should evaluate economic performance against indicators of what we really want. Healthy, happy children, families, communities, and natural systems. I advocate that we do away with all financial measures of positive economic performance and use real indicators of what we really want. This would place life values ahead of money values and dramatically reframe both our public and private economic priorities. Now think about where this leads us. Key piece of our problem is that as a species, in our aggregate, we are consuming Earth's resources faster than they can regenerate. This is, of course, a trip to Never Never Land. Contrary to the incessant drive to increase consumption to keep GDP growing, in most countries, particularly the most profligate, like the United States, we must actually manage our economies to reduce overall consumption, to systematically reduce GDP while simultaneously redistributing available resources from rich to poor and from destructive and non-essential to beneficial and essential uses. Of course, this is not an idea you often hear, but it is essential to securing our future as a nation and as a species. It requires turning our present economic system upside down and inside out to increase well-being while shrinking GDP. Here are some of the changes we're going to have to make. Listen for the hardship. We are going to have to end war and convert to a peace economy. I guess nobody's thinking of that as an unbearable hardship. We're going to have to reorganize our infrastructure to eliminate automobile dependence. We're going to have to curtail advertising and redirect those creative and media resources to education. We're going to have to end financial speculation and redirect investment to productive, sustainable enterprises devoted to meeting actual community needs. Now, this list is just a start. We could spend the rest of the evening here talking about all the things that we could just as well do without in order to have the things that we really need for all people. We hear frequent references these days to a distinction between the Wall Street economy and the Main Street economy, and this difference is crucial. Wall Street is in the business of using money to make money for people who have money without the burden of producing anything of value in return, all to generate unearned claims for the few against the real wealth of the many. It is an act of theft, and it should be so treated. The Main Street economy is comprised of local businesses and working people engaged in producing real goods and services to meet real needs and provide meaningful, secure family wage employment for the people of their communities. Main Street has been battered and tattered by the predatory intrusions of Wall Street corporations. It is, however, in revival as communities all across the nation rally to declare their independence from Wall Street and rebuild their community-serving economies that they once knew. Main Street is the logical foundation on which to build a new real wealth economy of green jobs, responsible community-oriented businesses, and sound environmental practices. Okay, so what do we need to do to bring down the walls that hold us captive to Wall Street's imperial power? We have to work on, excuse me, we have to work on three fronts. One, we need to change our cultural stories. The stories that hold us captive to empire. And we do that through conversations that in sufficient number transform our cultural stories to align with the truth that we already know in our hearts. Two, we need to create a new reality by creating healthy Wall Street economies from the bottom up that mimic the dynamics of healthy, locally rooted ecosystems, managed to optimize the health and well-being of all people, community, and nature. Third, we need to work politically, the national political level, to reestablish a progressive tax system and replace the Wall Street phantom wealth machine with a new money system designed for and accountable to the real wealth Main Street economies. That's all we need to do. Let's take them one at a time, starting with changing the stories that hold us captive to our collective cultural trance. It is a simple but rarely noted truth that every great transformational social movement begins with a conversation aimed at challenging a prevailing cultural story. Turns out that honest conversation may be the most revolutionary act of our time. Take the women's movement as an example. Not long ago, the prevailing cultural story maintained that the key to a woman's happiness is to find the right man, marry him, and devote her life to his service. I don't know what went wrong. Any of you remember this story? Was it working for any of you? You may recall that any woman for whom this story was not working was supposed to believe that the fault lay within herself, that she was not an adequate woman. And most women were afraid to express the truth because thereby they revealed the flaw in themselves until women started engaging in the revolutionary act of getting together in their living rooms to share their stories, and lo and behold, they pretty soon discovered that the story wasn't working for any of them. And as those conversations spread, they changed the story. The problem wasn't in the woman, the problem was in the story, and the result was the unleashing of the feminine energy that is now at the forefront of our transformational social movement. As we go public with the truth of our private stories, the false values of the public stories that hold us captive to empire are exposed as fabrications. Thus liberated, our individual intelligence becomes the intelligence of the group, and the direction of the human course begins to change. So let the conversations begin in our homes, our churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples to discover and affirm our true nature as spiritual beings having a human experience, as creative beings, co-creators in the continued unfolding of creation, and as a species with the capacity and the responsibility to accept collective responsibility for our own future. Now, even as we're engaging in these essential conversations, we must work simultaneously in our communities to bring a new life-serving, real wealth, green economy into being. As the Wall Street economy disintegrates, the communities with the best future prospects are those that are declaring their independence by rebuilding their local economies based on locally owned independent businesses. These communities are supporting local low-input family farms, developing local financial institutions, reclaiming their farm and forest lands, favoring their locally owned retail businesses, concentrating population in compact communities that reduce automobile dependence, retrofitting their buildings for energy conservation, and otherwise moving toward local self-reliance in food, energy, and basic essentials. Anybody here working on any of those? Let's see the hands. Anybody not working on any of those? Yeah, this is going on all around the country and all around the world. We are creating the new reality from the bottom up. And here in Portland, we have the Portland Sustainable Business Network, which is part of the National Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, which is working together with communities all across the U.S. and Canada on this creation of this new reality. Then turning to national and international policies. In Agenda for a New Economy, I spell out a 12-point Earth Community Policy agenda to support this restructuring of national and global economies. And we don't have time to cover all the points here, so you'll just have to buy the book from our wonderful Talking Drum bookstore here, and you'll have the 12 points. I'll just note here that these points include replacing financial indicators with health indicators as the basis for evaluating economic performance, include taking back the corporate charter to hold corporations accountable to the public interest. They include restoring the middle class with a progressive tax system with rates similar to those we had back in the Eisenhower administration. You remember the Republican Eisenhower administration when the top tax bracket was 91%? Well, that gave us the great middle class that became our definition for many of us of what it meant to be an American, what was special about our country. And it requires redesigning the system of money and finance to restore money to its proper role as servant and to assure that no bank is too big to fail. A lot of what we need to do financially is simply to reverse the process of banking consolidation and deregulation that gave Wall Street a stranglehold on the economy and restore community accountable financial system and institutions that we once had. Those of you who are of my age here may recall back that as we were growing up, we had a system of unitary banks. Each bank was an individual institution that was locally owned, and it was accountable for serving community financial needs. So the federal government must now take those failed Wall Street banks into receivership, bankruptcy. Break them up, sell their branches off to local investors to operate as community banks, mutual savings and loans and credit unions, devoted to serving the financial needs of their local communities within a strong regulatory framework. With regard to money creation, Wall Street bankers have diabolically created a money system that is designed to crash if the economy does not continuously grow their private profits. You may recall my earlier mention of the bookkeeping entry by which a bank creates new money when it issues a loan. That entry creates only the principal of the loan. It does not create the amount of the interest which the borrower must also repay. This means that to avoid sending the financial system into default and thereby collapsing the economy, much like we're now experiencing, the economy must continuously grow fast enough to generate sufficient demand for new loans to create the money required to make the interest payments on previous loans. The consequences, ever-increasing debt, inequality, destruction of the natural environment, and destruction of the social fabric of community. It is not a system we can continue to afford. It is time to strip private banks of their money creation powers and transfer the power and responsibility for money creation to government. Whenever there is a need to expand the money supply, the federal government can and should spend the required money into existence to fund public infrastructure and meet other public needs. To bring about these changes in the rules will require millions of people on the streets demanding independence from Wall Street. I love and honor our President Obama. I am absolutely changed my whole sense of being an American. I take great pride in our new president. But one of the things we're discovering, and I know this may be a shock to you, it turns out he's a politician. Which means that if we want him to do the things that we believed he was going to do, he is not our savior, he is a politician, and we must get out there and create the political pressure, creating the demand that he stand up to Wall Street and the pressures that Wall Street creates. Okay, you all got the picture. One of the things I'm thinking about, we're beginning to discuss with colleagues, is the idea of Seattle plus 10. You know, remember the great WTO demonstrations in Seattle in 1999? We are coming up on the 10th anniversary. That might be the right hook for national demonstrations in every major city in the country demanding independence from Wall Street. You'll find further information on all these issues in Agenda for a New Economy. Get a copy, organize a discussion group, engage your friends, and let's start changing the conversation and building the political momentum. Now, I'm assuming that, since this is Portland, I assume that pretty much everybody in here is a yes subscriber. Can I see the hands of the yes subscribers? Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. There are a few hands that did not go up. I urge you to act immediately to correct this obvious deficiency in your life. You know, you can get a copy of this summer 2009 issue, just rolled off the presses. It is about the new economy, and it talks about, you know, everybody wants to know, well, what can I do? This tells the stories of people all across the country that are doing the things we all need to be doing to bring this new economy into being. So, in closing, part of being human is to put aside the ways of our childhood to embrace the more inclusive values and responsibilities of adulthood. Our time has come to grow up as a species, coming of age on a small planet. This is the larger challenge before us. In a very real sense, it is about growing up spiritually to recognize and accept our place within the larger scheme of creation. A global spiritual awakening is already underway, sometimes within our religious institutions, often beyond them, and sometimes in spite of them. We must create opportunities within and without our religious institutions for thoughtful people to engage a process of true spiritual inquiry dedicated to drawing from the whole of human knowledge and experience to deepen our individual and collective understanding of ourselves and our place in creation. And as we engage this challenging work in its many dimensions, we must constantly remind ourselves that we are privileged to live at the most dangerous but also the most exciting moment of creative opportunity in the whole of the human experience. We have the power to turn this world around for the sake of ourselves, our children, for generations to come. We are the ones we've been waiting for.